Lena Kovács was 12 years old but looked no older than 9. She sat curled up on a thin cushioned bench in the most secluded corner of the lobby at Arcturus Systems, a leading European tech corporation specializing in cybersecurity. Her torn, overstuffed backpack pressed down on her legs. Every time someone walked past, she leaned slightly to one side as if trying to avoid the entire world. No one paid attention to her except for her mother, Marja Kovács, who was riding the elevator to the 39th floor to begin her morning cleaning shift. Lena rarely spoke, not because she was shy but because she spent most of her day thinking. And when she thought, she wrote in a thick, dog-eared notebook she kept with her like a precious treasure. The notebook was Lena's private world. Inside were circuit diagrams, cryptographic notations, and scattered handwritten notes. The CPU fan doesn't need to run if the temperature sensor isn't active. Bit 8 on the COM port causes interference if the clock is out of phase. She had learned all this on her own, not from school, but from broken devices, leaked articles, and free online videos, most of which she watched in secret. This building was her favorite place in the world. Not because of the polished marble floors, but because it was full of data. Of electricity. Of signals. Of things Lena felt were alive. She often arrived early with her mother, sat in her usual spot, pulled out her notebook, and imagined herself as an engineer. No one told her to leave because no one noticed she was there. Even the security guard who swiped her mother in each morning never glanced at her. To them, Lena was just a quiet shadow trailing the woman with the mop. But Lena didn't mind. She liked it that way. Because when you're invisible, no one asks questions. No one gets in your way. And in that silence, Lena learned. She watched employees open laptops in the lobby, observed the blinking LEDs on the router behind the reception desk, and listened for the soft click when the camera system changed modes at 8:45 every morning. Every detail was a piece of data. A part of a breathing system, and Lena understood it like a piece of music. This morning was no different. As soon as her mother quietly said 39, meaning the usual floor, Lena had already slipped away and taken her usual seat near the counter. She opened her notebook, flipping to the page she had left unfinished the day before, a schematic of a hypothetical circuit board she had designed, capable of transmitting signals through ultra-low radio frequencies. The idea had come to her after a night dreaming of whispering machines, a strange dream she had known since childhood. In Lena's mind, everything started connecting. A Bluetooth module salvaged from an old router plus power from a watch battery plus a decoder from a broken gaming console she had found under the kitchen table. Her pencil raced across the page. Lena didn't know, couldn't have known, that in just a few minutes this entire building would fall into chaos. And when it did, none of the adults would know where to begin. Except her. Lena was sketching the final segment of the hypothetical path from the transmitter module to the receiving core when the ceiling lights flickered. Just once. Then went out. Immediately after, the entire lighting system switched to emergency mode. Dim, faint backlighting glowed from the walls as if the building itself was holding its breath. She looked up. The lights at the reception desk had gone dark. The touchscreen displays turned black. 1 second. 2. Then 3. Not a single alarm sounded, and that, more than anything, caught Lena's attention. The first murmurs began to rise. An employee hurried past the desk, opened a tablet, typed something, and stopped, his face falling. Access denied. Another voice, internal network is down. A tense woman added, all stations reporting timeout. Then a small shout, we're locked out. The entire system. The elevator chime cut off mid-tone. The lighting control system shut down entirely as if an invisible hand had just strangled the machine that ran thousands of processes. Lena didn't move. She had seen minor network freezes before, glitches in transmission, brief disconnections from the main server. But this was different. No system alerts. No recovery signal. No soft amber flicker from the backup router. She sat perfectly still, listening closely to every word being spoken around her. We've tried rebooting the data cluster, no response. Can't ping external DNS. Internal proxy unreachable. Then a man's voice, low but filled with unease. This isn't a malfunction. This is an attack. Lena opened her notebook and wrote a single line. Not a system crash, it's been locked. She was still invisible. Sitting quietly behind the square column just meters from the center of the lobby, Lena listened and drew faster. Suppose the goal was to freeze the system without destroying it, what would be the first thing you'd need to hide? The network socket input. Socket overflow? One of the first things she had ever read about buffer overflow attacks said. If you don't see a broken port, it might be because it's already full from the inside. She glanced around. The adults, white shirts, shiny watches, were using terms like triple-layer firewall, log trace, zero trust protocol, but no one mentioned overflow. They were looking for the fault, just not in a place they could imagine. Lena was certain. Not intuition. Memory. She had once wrecked a neighbor's old laptop using the exact same technique, just to see whether the system would reboot when the socket was flooded with too much encrypted data at once. It didn't reboot. It froze. Just like this building. Lena tightened her grip on her pencil, crossed out a line, and wrote. If no one knows where to look. She wasn't thinking about being a hero. She only knew she understood what was happening. They didn't. And if she kept sitting there in silence, the system would collapse. She looked up, took a deep breath, and rose from the bench. Lena walked toward the crowd gathered in front of the reception desk. Each step deepened her hesitation but also pushed her closer to the inevitable being seen. She had learned early on that the first thing people do when they notice your presence is to doubt you. Stopping about 3 meters from the counter, Lena spoke up, her voice small but clear. Has anyone checked the socket overflow loop? Several men turned sharply. A man in a gray shirt squinted at her. What did you say? Another older, wearing a red badge, frowned. Whose kid is this? Lena instinctively took a step back but didn't run. Another voice spoke, deeper and calmer than the rest. What did she say about the socket? Everyone turned. It was Julian Fisher, the intern who had joined the security department 3 weeks ago. He didn't raise his voice, but it carried an odd weight. His gaze fixed on Lena, not hostile, not mocking, just curious. Lena lowered her voice, still standing in place. If the system isn't responding and there are no error logs, the socket overflow loop might be trapping the signal in a cycle. The fault's not in the code, it's at the socket level. A strange silence fell over the room as if the building itself were listening. Julian nodded slowly. She's not wrong. Immediately, someone scoffed. We're really letting a kid handle the firewall now? Is she the janitor or something? Another said, half joking, half annoyed. No badge, no ID. How did she even get in here? Lena felt the urge to back away again. In her mind, she saw her mother's face full of worry if she knew Lena was caught in the middle of this chaos. But then Julian spoke again, this time louder. We've tried every option. 3 shell recoveries, 2 DNS traces, nothing worked. If she has a different angle, I think we should at least let her try. A wave of murmurs spread. No one nodded, but no one openly objected either. Maybe they were just out of ideas. One of the engineers, probably the team lead, shrugged. The terminal's right there. If she wants to try, let her try. No one said another word. Lena walked to the control station. The screen glowed faint green. She had to climb onto the swivel chair to reach the keyboard. Julian quietly pulled the chair in and steadied it for her. He didn't say anything, just looked at her with an expression completely different from the others, not pity but respect. Lena gave a small nod and placed her notebook beside the keyboard. Her hand hovered above the controls, but she didn't type right away. She was listening. Not to sound, but to the system's rhythm. She closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds, then began typing. No one spoke. Only the sound of keys, steady, decisive, filled the stifling room. After 3 commands, a line appeared. Julian leaned in and whispered. Damn, it's real. Lena didn't smile. She just kept typing. The 4th command. The 5th. The 6th. Her hands moved as if she had done this 100 times before. But she hadn't, at least not on a system this large. And still, she remembered every step. Behind her, the men who had mocked her now stood frozen like statues. One of them muttered. She's accessing the subcommand layer. Another spoke slowly, almost in disbelief. We're looking at the admin shell. Julian squinted. Not just looking. She's inside it. Lines of code streamed down the screen like water sliding across glass. Lena didn't sit the way engineers usually did, with a straight back and hands on the desk, but leaned slightly forward, legs folded up on the chair, face close to the screen. She paid no attention to who might be watching, not even the CEO observing from behind the glass wall. Everything else faded away, leaving only the system's architecture slowly revealing itself under her hands. The 2nd shell opened, then the 3rd. Each deeper access felt like moving through a maze designed to mislead, not to block. She saw it in the code, simulated error files, logs disguised to look like temporary failures, far too sophisticated to be accidental. And then, in the 4th shell, she saw a familiar command. So familiar that her heart skipped a beat. She had rewritten that command herself 3 months ago during an attempt to build a simulated user model to fool a monitoring system. She didn't know who originally came up with the syntax, she had only seen it in an anonymous code file downloaded from a hidden forum called Symmetric Disruption. The forum hadn't lasted long. Just enough time for Lena to hand copy everything she could read. And now that exact command was here, at the heart of the Arcturus system, embedded in the very code attacking it. Not a coincidence. Not a copy. The same way of thinking. Lena sat upright, taking her hands off the keyboard for the first time. She wasn't afraid because the system was under attack. She was afraid because the one who wrote this code was like her. Behind her, Julian had stepped closer. He didn't say a word, but Lena could feel his presence, his steady breathing, the quiet stillness as if ready to support her if needed. Julian, Lena said without turning. Yeah? If I told you the person attacking this system isn't a professional hacker, but someone self-taught like me, would you believe it? Julian didn't hesitate. I would. Lena looked down at the next line of code. Each line felt like a sentence, a whisper in the language of those who had lived in the system's shadows, trying to understand it by instinct. This person didn't want to destroy. They wanted to be understood. Something deep inside Lena resonated, a connection she shouldn't have felt with someone who was bringing down an entire company. But she couldn't deny it. The code carried traces of solitude, of a mind shaped without guidance, where logic and emotion ran side by side like parallel circuits. I know what they were thinking when they wrote this, Lena whispered. They didn't mean to stay hidden. They wanted someone like them to recognize it. Julian looked at her, his gaze shifting from surprise to understanding. Someone like you. Lena nodded. I don't know if I'm fixing the system or talking to someone on the other side of the screen. Far away in the executive office upstairs, Victor Brandt, CEO of Arcturus, stood silently in front of the monitoring display. The assistant next to him spoke, her voice trembling. Sir, this is a triple-layered security system. No one from outside should be able to get this deep. Except... Victor closed his eyes for a second as if recalling something from the past. Then he opened them. Except the very children we never paid attention to. He looked at Lena, who was now typing out each function in reverse, not copying, not searching, only using memory and intuition. Exactly like someone he once knew. She had rewritten this command 3 months ago in an attempt to simulate a user model and deceive a monitoring process. She never knew who had invented the syntax, she had only found it in an anonymous code file downloaded from a hidden forum called Symmetric Disruption. The forum didn't last long. Just enough time for Lena to copy down everything she could find by hand. And now that very command was here, at the heart of Arcturus's system, embedded in the code attacking it. Not a coincidence. Not imitation. The same way of thinking. Lena sat up straight, taking her hands off the keyboard for the first time. She wasn't afraid because the system was under attack. She was afraid because the person who wrote this code was like her. Behind her, Julian had moved closer. He said nothing, but Lena could feel he was there, his steady breath, the silence like a safety net ready to catch her if needed. Julian? Lena asked without turning. Yeah? If I told you the one attacking this system isn't a professional hacker, but someone self-taught like me, would you believe it? Julian didn't hesitate. I would. Lena looked down at the next line of code. Each line felt like a sentence, a whisper in the language of those who had lived in the shadows of the system, trying to understand it by instinct. This person didn't want to destroy. They wanted to be understood. A deep resonance stirred again in Lena, a sense of empathy she shouldn't have felt for someone bringing a corporation to its knees. But she couldn't deny it. The code carried marks of isolation, of a thought process shaped by no teacher, only logic and feeling, running together like twin currents. I know what they were thinking when they wrote this, Lena murmured. They didn't want to hide. They wanted someone like them to see it. Julian looked at her, his eyes shifting from surprise to understanding. Like you. Lena nodded. I don't know if I'm about to fix the system or have a conversation with someone on the other side of the screen. Far above, in the executive office, Victor Brandt stood silently in front of the display. The assistant next to him said with a tremble, Sir, this is a triple-layer security system. No one from the outside should be able to reach this deep. Except... Victor closed his eyes for a second like recalling something long ago. Then opened them. Except the very kids we never paid attention to. He watched Lena typing each function in reverse, not copying, not referencing, only from memory and intuition. Exactly like someone he once knew. Victor Brandt stood motionless behind the double-layered, anti-glare glass of the executive command room. From here, he could look down at the 17th floor, the temporary core network hub where senior engineers were supposed to be restoring the system. Instead, a young girl with messy brown hair and hoodie sleeves pulled past her fingers was crouched on a chair, controlling the system as if she had built it herself. "Who is that girl?" Victor asked, his eyes fixed on the scene below. The assistant hesitated, glancing at the screen. "Her name is Lena Kovács, daughter of one of the janitorial staff. No file in the system. No file. And yet she's accessing the operating core and hasn't triggered a single failsafe." Victor turned around, slowly walking back toward his desk. Each step felt heavy, as if he were moving backward into an older version of himself. On the screen behind him, Lena typed another command. A progress bar appeared. The system was extracting a secure backup, but not through any standard protocol. It was using a call branch that had never been pre-programmed. Down below, Lena typed the final command in the recovery sequence. Bash. Saception SUA. Rollback, safe_mode equals true, timestamp equals prior_last_ key hash. The screen flickered, then the entire system entered reboot standby mode. A wave of LED lights shifted from red to green. The once dark control panels lit up one by one. Cooling fans began to spin gently as if the system itself was exhaling. A voice murmured behind her. "She actually did it." A stunned engineer whispered like he didn't dare believe it. Julian stepped closer, his voice low. "You just reversed the attack vector?" Lena nodded, eyes still on the screen. "No need to erase it. Just rewind it. They left a way out." She didn't explain further. But in her heart she knew the attacker didn't want to destroy anything. They wanted to be understood. And she had understood. Above, Victor no longer looked at the screen. He looked at the corner of his desk where an old photo frame sat, a girl crouched by the doorstep tinkering with a battered radio. She too had a hunched posture, dark hair, and eyes that never left the tangle of wires. That girl once told him when she was very small, "If I can fix this radio, maybe I'll hear a voice from a better world." One morning she vanished. No note. No explanation. No one searched. And now Victor felt a chill. The girl in that photo and the one down on the floor below were eerily alike. Not in the face, but in the way they touched the world. As if it were a machine that could be understood. If only someone was patient enough to listen. A notification popped up on his screen. System recovery, 84%. Backup successfully restored. Executor, unknown. Victor shut off the monitor. Then reached for his phone. Call Lena Kovács's mother. Schedule a meeting with them, both of them. Tomorrow. At the executive board office. The next morning, Lena sat beside her mother in the waiting lounge on the ground floor of Arcturus Systems. She wore nothing but her usual gray hoodie and faded jeans. Her notebook was still in her backpack. One hand rested lightly on the broken zipper, a habit whenever she wasn't sure she belonged somewhere. Mrs. Marja, her mother, sat upright, clutching her handbag as if holding onto a piece of dignity. She had never been called upstairs, never stepped into the executive wing. A receptionist in a crisp suit invited them into the elevator, speaking gently, though with a slight tremble. 42nd floor. The boardroom. Inside, no one was waiting with applause or certificates. No nameplates. No camera crews. Just a long walnut table and 4 people already seated. Victor Brandt, Julian Fisher, a silver-haired woman with round glasses, the chief technical officer, and a corporate lawyer quietly typing away on a laptop. Victor was the first to speak. "Thank you for coming. Lena, yesterday you did something an entire team of engineers couldn't do. But what impressed me more," he paused for a moment, "was how you did it. No waiting. No noise. No need for validation." Lena stayed silent. She wasn't sure if she should say thank you or "I didn't mean to." Instead, she unzipped her backpack, took out her notebook, and flipped to one of the final pages. She slid it toward Victor. It wasn't a system diagram. It wasn't lines of code. It was something in between. The curve of circuitry drawn like rivers, data flows mimicking heartbeats, technical symbols woven into near-abstract spirals. Victor held the page with both hands, not turning to look at her. The room fell silent. "You use this to visualize the system?" the woman with glasses asked. Lena nodded. "If I don't draw it out, my head gets tangled. I need to see it before I can find what's wrong." Julian spoke softly as if translating for the table. She translates system logic into a personal visual language. It's like a kind of digital intuition. Victor was still rotating the paper in his hands. At a certain angle, he stopped, peering at a loop nestled between 2 signal clamps. "And this?" he asked. Lena tilted her head. "It's a structure anchor. When an error causes the logic to fold in on itself, that loop helps reorient the data stream before everything collapses." Victor exhaled, long and slow. That's exactly what happened yesterday. For the first time since entering the room, Lena looked him directly in the eyes. No defiance. No fear. Just conversation. After a few more minutes, Victor made an offer. We'd like to create a special program for you, Lena. A non-binding scholarship, a personal mentor, lab access, none of it limited by age or qualifications. You won't have to enroll here, but you will have a place in this system. If you want it. Mrs. Marja covered her mouth. Her eyes welled with tears. Lena asked only one question, eyes still fixed on the diagram resting on the table. Will I still be allowed to break things? A beat of silence. Then Victor laughed, not the polite, corporate kind, but the laugh of a man who just remembered he once believed in things unwritten in contracts. That's the only way to understand how they work, he said. You have to break them to see what's inside. Lena didn't smile, but she nodded. And that was enough. 1 week later, Lena Kovács walked through the security gates of Arcturus Systems with a new ID badge, white background, red border, and bold text that read, Lena Kovács, access full. No mother's last name. No school record. She wasn't an employee. She wasn't a guest. She was Lena. And now she belonged here. No escort. No orientation. Lena walked straight to the engineering floor where she was given a desk in the second testing lab, the space where engineers experimented with custom hardware and core network algorithms. Her desk wasn't private. It didn't need to be. But no one touched it. On it sat an old Raspberry Pi, a thin flat monitor, and a second notebook, thicker, newer, but with a handwritten line on the cover. If it doesn't work, let it tell you why. She had written that herself. At first, people were curious. Some older engineers were annoyed that a kid was in the lab, but then they realized Lena didn't ask dumb questions. She didn't ask for help. And more unsettlingly, she began making suggestions. In the second week, she proposed rewriting the fallback routine for the signal scanning module. Her version used 14% fewer processing cycles. One department lead initially dismissed it, then quietly switched to her approach. By the third week, an AI model test group discovered that Lena had replaced their supervised learning structure with a form of signal interference mesh, a design found nowhere in any formal curriculum. The result? The system lost 30% less input data. They asked her, "Where did you learn that?" She just said, "I guessed and tried." In the evenings, Lena still took the bus home with her mother. She didn't explain what happened in the lab, not out of secrecy, but because it was hard to describe. How could she explain hearing the system through the hum of the cooling fans or feeling the phase shift when logic loops became unstable? But her mother understood in her own way. Every night, she left a warm cup of tea by the desk where Lena disassembled old voltage regulators or soldered broken radio boards. No words. None needed. One afternoon, someone scribbled on the big whiteboard above her station. Lena's brain. No one claimed it. Lena didn't erase it. She liked it. And so, the girl who once sat quietly in a lobby chair, hoodie sleeves past her wrists and an old notebook in hand, became an indispensable part of the team. Not because she was given a chance, but because no one could deny the necessity of the way she saw the world. Inside the 45th floor office of Arcturus Systems, Victor Brandt sat alone. In front of him was not a dashboard or stock chart, but a small frame set slightly to the right of his desk. Inside it lay a sheet of school notebook paper, one corner softly folded, faint fingerprints of sweat and graphite dust smudging the surface. On that page was Lena's drawing, a circuit loop sketched like a coiled snail turning on itself. Data flows were not straight arrows but curved branches, rippling like water. Electronic symbols mingled with tiny circles, each bearing a meaning known only to its creator. Victor looked at the drawing every morning, before he opened his email. He had once run the finest engineering teams, signed contracts with top universities to develop transmission protocols. He knew what a proper technical diagram looked like. But this drawing was not proper. It was personal. He recalled how Lena had slid it to him at the meeting. She hadn't explained or presented. She'd simply said, "I don't know how to say it in words, but if you rotate the page the right way, maybe you'll see the system the way I do." That day, Victor turned the page 3 times. On the 4th, he stopped. A section of logic control failure from the recent attack was modeled by lines resembling curved nerve fibers touching each other. Not a data recovery chart, but the expression of an internal rhythm. Victor suddenly understood. Lena didn't read the system in syntax. She felt it as a living thing with a heartbeat. That evening, he stayed late in his office. Not to finalize contracts, but because he couldn't bring himself to leave. Something was stirring inside him. Not doubt, not quite emotion, but a yearning to understand again. So he rose, ignored the private elevator, and walked down to the 18th floor test lab by himself. No one knew he came. The sliding door opened in silence. Only the soft yellow of a desk lamp glowed. Lena was asleep in a chair, back slumped, head tilted, one hand still touching the keyboard. The monitor before her glimmered faintly, running a wireless signal test script. Victor stepped closer. Not a sound. He saw the torn backpack on the floor. A dismantled circuit board lay on the desk. Red and blue wires messy yet purposeful. A notebook lay open, dense with handwritten symbols. The last page read, "Sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't an error, but logic in the right place at the wrong time." Victor inhaled. It had been a long time since a sentence left him unable to argue. No theory, no ISO process, no technical board, just a simple line written by a child no one had noticed. He didn't call her name, didn't wake her. Instead, he pulled a small note card from the pocket notebook he kept for private thoughts, paper he used before assistants took over. He wrote a single line in steady italic. "Thank you for reminding me." He placed the note beside the keyboard. Before leaving, he looked at the girl once more. Not as a potential employee, not a curiosity, not a special case, but as the rawest version of himself, before the world turned every passion into a KPI. The next morning, Lena awoke to dawn light spilling through the glass. She yawned, rubbed her eyes, and noticed the note. She read it. She didn't smile. She didn't reply. She simply folded it carefully into quarters and slipped it inside her notebook cover as a marker. For the first time in her life, she felt she had reached someone, not with words, but with logic. On Saturday morning, the Arcturus building was nearly empty. The core systems continued running as usual, but there were no hurried footsteps, no quick stand-ups by the elevators, no printers humming on the engineering floor. Lena arrived alone, not in her usual hoodie, but in a light brown turtleneck sweater. She walked slowly, unhurried, as if retracing the rhythm of a place that had once been foreign, and now, in the strangest way, felt familiar. On her desk sat a small box. No name on the outside, just a handwritten note in blue ink. "For now, open somewhere no one can see." Lena opened it right there. Inside, an incomplete circuit board, a light sensor, an adjustable microphone wire, and an old-style flash drive. Alongside them, a folded note with 4 words. "If you want to answer." She knew immediately who sent it. Not Julian, not her mother, but the one person who never asked, and yet always heard what she never said aloud. Victor Brandt. That afternoon, Lena walked up to the higher floors, unannounced. Victor's office door was open. No assistant, no intermediaries, just him sitting in thought before a printed system schematic, a rarity in the digital age. He looked up as she entered, but didn't seem surprised. "You opened the box," she said without preamble. "Good," Victor replied. "I wasn't sure you'd like that kind of game." "It wasn't a game," she said. "It was an invitation." Victor nodded. Between them stretched the gap of 2 generations, 2 kinds of intelligence, 2 opposing life paths. One learned to control systems through strategy. The other learned to listen to them through intuition. But in that moment the gap felt thin. Thin enough to almost touch. Lena didn't sit. She stepped forward and gently placed the flash drive onto his desk. Not filled with code or fixes, but with a copy of the fragment hidden in the attack code from that day. The one she had saved, not for investigation, but because of an overwhelming sense that she would see it again. "The one who wrote this," she said, eyes fixed on the drive, "didn't want to destroy anything. They wanted to be recognized. They wanted someone like them to notice the trail." "Like you?" Victor asked, not sarcastic, not doubtful. "No," Lena replied. "Like us." He froze slightly, then slowly leaned back in his chair. For a moment, The lines around his eyes became clearer, not from age, but because he saw himself reflected in something he thought he'd lost long ago. I once knew someone like that, Victor said. She left no name, no address, just a half-burned radio that could still pick up signals from places no one thought possible. Later, I convinced myself it was just coincidence, a strange moment from childhood. But one day, he continued, I saw you, sitting in the wreckage of our systems, and I understood. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a missed signal. Lena didn't speak. She simply looked at him, not as a child within the system, but as someone standing beside him at the edge of a map not yet drawn. Are you afraid? Victor asked. Afraid of what? Afraid that if you go too far, you'll become the one who wrote that code. Lena lowered her head, hands interlaced. Yes, she whispered, but I'm afraid of something else too. What? I'm afraid that if I don't keep going, I'll never find out whether I could write a different kind of code. One that heals. Victor stood. As he rounded the desk to stand beside her, Lena felt something pass between them. Not words, but will. The shift in a person who once forgot what had made them begin, and now found it again, in the small figure standing before them. Then write it, he said. I don't need to read it. I just need to know that it exists. She nodded. She didn't smile, but her eyes lit up, like an LED just reconnected, bright enough to show the system is still alive. Since that day, Lena was no longer regarded as an anomaly in the system. She no longer shocked anyone when she suggested a change or spotted an offbeat logic layer no one had touched. Gradually, her presence became self-evident. Yet precisely when no one doubted her anymore, Lena felt something shifting inside herself. Not because she still needed to prove anything, but because, for the first time, she wasn't merely repairing something broken. She could build. She could experiment. She could take risks. Most of all, she could fail. Fail safely. She spent many evenings in the lab doing no work at all, simply drawing. No circuit diagrams. No logic trees. Just looping, tangled lines like neural networks, or perhaps the stream of thought when it no longer needs to be arranged. Once, Julian passed by, glanced at a drawing, and asked, "What does this do?" She answered, "Nothing. It's just how I clear the cache." Julian smiled and didn't ask further. He understood. During a routine sweep of the internal defenses, Lena discovered a tiny vulnerability no one had noticed, harmless yet clear enough for a keen observer. She didn't raise an alert. She didn't patch it at once. Instead, she wrote a short piece of code. Not to block, but to welcome. A silent invitation. For whoever might be out there thinking like she once did, perhaps still watching. The script raised no alarms, locked nothing. Its sole task, if someone entered through that very loop, the system would display a single line in green on black. I see you. I'm not afraid of you. She stored the code in a hidden branch of the maintenance system. No one at the company knew, not even Victor. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't an experiment. It was a dialogue that needed no reply. A recognition that somewhere beyond the dark, another mind might still be wrestling between breaking things and finding its voice. Lena knew not everyone gets the choice she had. But if someone was about to stray too far, she wanted them to read that line before it was too late. That night, Lena stayed in the lab until late. She did nothing special, just watched the main screen where the signals flickered like a heartbeat. Then she opened a third notebook, the one no one had ever seen. On the first page, she wrote a sentence very slowly. The system doesn't speak in words, but it listens to anyone patient enough to type line by line without demanding an answer. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to listen for what else the system might have to say. After years of silence, for the first time, even the quiet seemed to respond. It was a Monday like any other when Lena walked into Arcturus Systems. No one looked surprised as she tapped her badge. No one took photos. No one called her a prodigy, a phenomenon, or the cleaning girl from back then. They called her Lena. That was all. She passed the reception desk, once a shadowed corner where she used to sit, sketching in silence. The receptionist today was someone new. She nodded politely, unaware that the quiet girl before her had saved the entire system 3 months ago. Lena nodded back and kept walking. The building still ran with its cold precision. Elevators pinged at every floor. Servers clattered behind soundproof glass. Engineers argued over syntax no one else could understand. This rhythm once made Lena feel like an outsider. Not anymore. Not because the system had changed, but because she had found her way through it. Engineering floor. Lab 2. Lena's desk was no longer a tucked-away corner behind a testing station. Now it was half of the central table in the DriftCell, a group dedicated to simulating irregular logic patterns that traditional systems couldn't process. A group she had proposed herself. At first, it was just her, Julian, and an engineer named Elise. Now they were 5. No one needed to defend her from doubt anymore. Because no one doubted. Victor Brandt entered around mid-morning. He didn't come to the lab to check progress anymore. He came because he wanted to understand what he was leading. And because he wanted to keep learning. He stopped at Lena's desk. She was scribbling commands into her notebook but looked up when she saw him. There are a few people from the board who want to visit the cell, he said. I can bring them down. But if you'd rather not talk to them. It's fine, Lena replied. You're sure? I used to not want to be seen, she said. But now, I want them to see what's right. What's that? That being an anomaly doesn't mean being wrong. Victor smiled. It was one of those rare sentences he wished he'd heard much earlier in life. That afternoon, Lena received a message from the internal system. Not a command. Not an alert. Just a simple line, unsigned. The green code you left, I saw it. And I stopped. Lena stared at the words, her heart stilled. She didn't reply. She simply closed the message and added a new line to her notebook. Not all shortcuts are for escaping. Some are for finding your way back. That evening, light rain fell. Lena left the building with her mother. They didn't speak much. They never needed many words. On the bus, Lena leaned her head against the window, watching raindrops trace lines down the glass like signals running through a wire. She no longer had to choose between silence and existence. Now she was part of the system. Not because the system changed to accept her, but because she had touched its deepest core. Not with power, but with understanding. And there she had left her first fingerprint. Not to be remembered, but to leave the door open for other quiet ones still searching for a signal in the noise. In the hush of the ride, Lena smiled faintly. No one called today special. And that was what made it so.